So, welcome to Talking True Crime. I'm Mark Williams-Thomas, and this is the first edition of our podcast. It's going to come to you live. We're going to talk about real issues that affect you and I, things that we hear in the news, and we're going to open it up to discussion. So, we want your involvement. So, as the podcast gets going, more people know about it. I want you to become the audience. I want you to interact with me, ask me questions, ask my guests questions. And as we go along, we'll be honest, we'll be frank, and we'll be open to you. Our first guest, which I will come to very shortly, is someone who has got a huge amount of journalistic experience. And actually, he's going to set up the whole purpose of these podcasts. But before we do that, let's just look at a number of cases that have appeared in the news over the recent weeks. Garrick, this is a PC who was investigated by the police on a number of occasions, but as a result of total failures, and I mean total failures, they investigated him 9 times. And as a result of that, they didn't even know that he was a police officer. He got investigated for an allegation of rape in 2021. And following that investigation, the victim withdrew their allegation. But rather than continue to keep him under investigation, they allowed him to return back to duties. Shocking case. At the end of this, I'm going to talk to you about a number of other cases. But before that, let's get going because I don't want to take up too much time. So Toby, I'm going to let him introduce himself. But Toby is my boss. He is really the backbone of Newsquest. And I want to talk to him about a number of issues that exist within journalism at present moment in time and get a flavour of what's happening at Newsquest. So welcome, Toby. Thank you for joining me.
Hello, Mark. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you. So, Toby, just give me a background of your work.
Sure. Well, I've been in journalism now for around 30 years. My current role is Editorial Director of Newsquest, which means I'm kind of leading the strategy across our 200 news brands that we have now across the UK. And it's a very exciting role. And previous to this, I was the editor of the Dorset Echo and Bournemouth Echo. But I started my career on Sunday People back in 1990.
And there's a picture of you. So that you look a little bit younger there.
They are some new trainees that we've got. The next generation.
And tell me, at school, did you have an interest in journalism at school?
Yeah, I did do a lot of creative writing. I did seem to be pretty good. It was one of the few things that I was good at school was writing. I had a good imagination. So, my parents actually bought me my first typewriter when I was 8 years old, where I used to sit, and spend my evenings and weekends typing out imaginary stories. And I suppose, it was kind of inevitable that I would end up in journalism.
And in terms of the role that you do now, how many people are you responsible for? And what's your day-to-day work?
Well, I mean, there's no real kind of 2 days that are the same. There's underneath me, there's as I said, 200 news brands, and each of those, many of those have got editors. There's about 35 editors now across Newsquest that are responsible for those titles. And, my day-to-day could be that I could be having meetings with editors. I've just come off a call just now of one of our regions of editors and their MDs. And, and really what we do is we talk through whether or not they're on track for, the strategy and whether there's more that we can do to help coach their teams to get where they need to be. So my kind of brief really is that, we need to accelerate our kind of audience size, but at the same time, make our titles as sustainable as possible, which, obviously has its challenges. But, before COVID, I was obviously traveling around quite a lot. We've got, titles all the way from Scotland to Devon. And now, since then, I'm doing a lot more teams, but I'm also currently responsible for the South Coast region. So I'll spend some time in those newsrooms as well, because, I like to, keep my hand in and keep abreast of everything that's going on, because the situation in the industry and what newsrooms are doing is evolving so quickly.
And journalism's changed so much. Gone are the days where it was just simply newspapers, they got delivered through your door. Now, of course, you're getting news on all kinds of different formats, whether that be through social media, whether that be through a website. It's really changed.
It has, and it's actually a really good time to talk about this, because this week there was new publicity out by the News Media Association around the fact that 40 million people now read local news, which is 75% of the population of Britain.
No, that's a
And
lot.
I think it's absolutely astonishing.
Mm.
And as what you were saying there about a lot of people say with a printed newspaper, we've actually now got more readers than we ever had done before, and that's due to the internet, where we get huge audience and that brand loyalty. So and I think with COVID in particular, we really came into our strength then, because people were turning to us as the kind of trusted local news source against all of the rubbish and rumor on social media about what was happening with the pandemic. And I think as a result from that, we've actually seen trust grow in our local news brands. And I think that's really says it all really about the fact that we've been here for 100 years, and you can see why we want to be here for 100 years more.
And trust is such an important thing. Of course, we can all remember fake news and the whole issues that come out of President Trump. And trust is one of those things that once you've lost it, it's really hard to get back. Do you think that local journalism generates more trust than national journalism?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think we've actually seen there's been a survey recently that's seen our trust go up by 7% from where it was in 2018. And I think that as I said, that the national, we kind of really need to kind of make sure that people don't associate us too much with some of the past practices of what happened with national brands, in particular the phone hacking. Because obviously that's the sort of thing that's really damaging for us as an industry.
Did that damage you? I mean, obviously Leveson came out of the News of the World that was shut down as a result of phone hacking, and Leveson identified some serious failings from journalists in the way that they worked with police and other officials, and in terms of how some journalists obtained their information. Did that affect you at Newsquest?
It didn't affect us at Newsquest, because we haven't got national brands, and we weren't in the practice of what they were with phone hacking and the issues that they were having with payments to police, etc. We have never been involved in those kind of bad practices. So as a consequence of that, I think that we've managed to remain those trusted local news brands that we have. And as we've seen our trust grow, I think that kind of really demonstrates the fact that people do rely on us for trusted local news.
And what about the demographics? So young people are consuming news in a very different way. I don't know how many young people would buy a newspaper now and read a newspaper, but they do consume it on their phone. I watch the 10 o'clock news, and it's it's a thing that I grew up with, but I don't think many young generation now would watch the 10 o'clock news. They consume the news at the certain points during the day.
Definitely. And, I think that, what we found is when I started going into talk to students at universities, I'm involved in Bournemouth University, and I'm the industry advisor for that, and I go in and I talk to the students quite a bit. And a few years ago, when I was going in and talking to the students, and I was asking them, do they buy a newspaper? Do they read a newspaper? And they were very much kind of, well, no, we don't, because our parents read the newspaper, but we don't. Well, when more recently, when I've gone in and spoken to them about our brand, and are you aware of these brands and the kind of journalism that we're doing, many of them now were, because they were looking at us. They can see us now on TikTok. They signed up to our newsletter. They see us on Facebook. So I think that they're not buying a newspaper. They're not reading the newspaper, that generation. But thanks to the internet and the social platforms that we now have, we are managing to engage with that much younger demographic that we never would have done otherwise.
And you've got a really exciting new program. In fact, I'm going to give one of the lectures in relation to investigative journalism, which is really trying to embrace the younger generation and introduce them into journalism. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so what it is we've embarked on a new project which is the Newsquest Investigations Team, and it comes off the back of obviously hiring you, Mark, to come in and work with our teams, which has been amazing for us with your experience. And what we've done is we've launched the Newsquest True Crime platform on YouTube, where yourself and a couple of other journalists, like Jody, Doherty-Cove, for example, have been producing really good, compelling true crime documentary series. And what we want to do now is get more involved with our newsrooms. So with the Newsquest Investigations Team, we've got around 40 to 50 of our journalists that are situated in different areas of our business, who are going to be trained by you and your team, Mark, to become the best possible investigative journalism that we can have. And that means that they're going to then be able to embark on doing some of the podcasts and videos that we want them to do in the coming weeks and months, which is going to be phenomenal, because the investigative journalism is so important. And if we haven't got journalists doing the kind of undercover work and the kind of exposing and shaming and people that are wrongdoing, then we may as well just hang up our coats and leave, because there are people there that will get away with things if we aren't there to expose them.
Investigative journalism is so key. I mean, my view of it in terms of journalism as a whole is that if you don't have investigative journalism fall down, because it is so integral in terms of us holding other people to account, the police, the authorities, local authorities, individuals. And if we don't hold them to account, then who does? And of course, the public are looking for us to get answers when things have gone wrong. And what I love about local journalism is the familiarity and the closeness that they can have with local communities in order to get to the heart of issues that perhaps won't necessarily get picked up on a national level, but really mean something on a local level.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's this, there's this whole thing about the local ecosystem with news, which the average reader won't know about, because if it's not a Westminster story or a celebrity story, the chances are what people are reading on national news websites originated on a local news website like ours, and then sold on to them. So without local news brands like ours, there's going to be very little content in existence that's not about, Westminster and celebrities. The BBC don't break stories; they just, follow up ours. So without us creating all this content, the ecosystem is going to suffer as a consequence. We lobby MPs about this, and let's face it, some are pretty keen, that we're not around to scrutinise them and hold them to our account. But fundamentally, if we're not here, there is no news.
No, and I think that's really important. I think people miss it. They go to national news because they think, oh, okay, there's national news. It's whatever that national supplier is. But the news has come from a regional level. It all starts at a local level, and therefore it gets fed into it. And I think very often, I'm a great one of praising the ability of local journalists. I think we need to do that more. And I think the public often forget that actually that's where it comes from. Those big crime stories, they started in a village somewhere and then they escalated up to a national level.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that, that's what's really important about, why local news needs to survive. There could be crooked councillors, celebrity paedophiles, powerful people. They all need to be held account for their wrongdoing. And without that, there is a danger that type of journalism won't happen, and all those stories of wrongdoing and corruption will go unreported, which is a real danger for the future of journalism.
Do you think journalism has suffered massively in recent years? Funding obviously has been an issue, but do you think the trust that we talked about at the beginning has put people off?
I don't think the trust issue has at all. I mean, the biggest problem for our industry is the future, of the funding of the business model, because the government ad spend, for example, with the big tech platforms, just completely dwarfs the spend in local news media, and that's despite our huge reach and our high levels of public trust. Something like 3% of its advertising budget was spent in local news media last year, compared to 17%, which was spent with Google and Facebook. And, that's crazy when you consider that we reach more people in our local news areas than Facebook does, which is now actually declining, in audience, as more of their readers are turning to sort of TikTok and Snapchat for news.
And how important do you think social media is? I mean, have you had to change a business model to incorporate social media, the likes of Twitter and TikTok, for example, in the way that you put news out? And I know we're obviously using it very much for the crime network, but local reporters?
I think we have to go just where the audience is. And, if the audience, when the audience was on Facebook, that's where we had to start sending our readers and our news to make sure that we got those readers to our website back. I think with Twitter, it's quite different in it's much more of a kind of source of news or a way to, debate news issues. It's not really where we would get,
It's kind of a platform for breaking news is Twitter. It's become that kind of platform where a lot of stories break on Twitter.
It has, absolutely. And, the government, local and national will use it, police will use it. But nevertheless, nevertheless, we still have to go back and check what they're doing, because the police, for example, will use Twitter for breaking news, and they will dictate what we know, and only a very small percentage of crimes that are happening in the UK will actually be publicised by the police. It's not a case now of where we used to have local reporters, for example, going in to visit the police station, sitting down there, going through the book with the cops and looking at every single spit and cough that happened on their beat that week. Those books are closed now. That access has been shut down. There's now just press officers that the gatekeepers to what the public knows. We've done FOIs on this sort of thing before, and it's incredible the amount of crimes that go unreported because the police do not want to tell people what's going on. And that's why, we need to have this investigation unit at Newsquest, because we can actually uncover that sort of, material and make sure the public know.
Yeah, and I think one of the massive things is that it's quite interesting how, certainly when I was in the police, we'd have court reporters there all the time. They'd come to the trials. Of course, a lot of that has died, albeit Newsquest, thankfully, still has a court reporter system. Not everywhere, but in a lot of places. And that information obviously is then fed into the nationals. And it's quite interesting the amount of murder investigation, murder trials that happen at court that never see the light of day.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we have got court reporters across the country. We make sure that all of our big dailies are represented in court with journalists. And, and it's a great way as well to get the human side from the family, because quite often the police will say, the family don't want to talk to you. But we'll actually find that we go there, we build that relationship, and we actually then get the human side of the story, which is really important. But there are, lots of, crimes that do go unreported in the courts. We make sure that we publicise those so people, can see that open justice. I mean, I'm a massive advocate of open justice, and it's almost like there isn't a day go by that some criminal in court is trying to plead anonymity, which we then get our legal representatives to go in and challenge, because the fact and our reporters will stand up in court.
And you've had some great results, haven't you? You've challenged cases. There was a recent case that was challenged by one of the Newsquest reporters, and actually got the the sanctions lifted, so the name could be reported.
Yeah, and I took a call last night about something similar, where criminals will say, my mental health, or they'll say that their mental health will be affected, or they'll be suicidal, and these are real serious criminals, like paedophiles, who are trying to get anonymity based on their mental health, which is absolutely appalling. The public have a right to know who these people are, and it's and that's why we insist on having a court reporter at every one of our daily newspapers that's in court and reporting on these people, to make sure that they're publicised and named and shamed for what they've done.
Tell me a little bit about the people you interview. Some people, obviously not that many people, but you do interview some people. Tell me about the young journalists that are coming through. What is it that they're looking for, and what level are they at?
Well, I mean, the young journalists coming through, I mean, I do get involved at quite a level to start with, because I've launched an apprenticeship scheme with Newsquest, and we've also got the Young Reporters scheme, which we're starting at the end of this month, which is actually working with schools, with young journalists that are 15, 16 years old who are really interested in a career in journalism. And we're hoping that we've got 30 pupils from across the UK signed up to it at the moment from schools. And we're hoping that, we can get, some of our...
and that's completely new, isn't it? It's new to Newsquest, but actually in journalism, it's new as well.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a brand new scheme. There isn't another scheme like it, the Young Reporter scheme. And, fundamentally what it is we're going to be giving mini masterclasses for the next few months, with the hope that some of these 30 will actually say they want to be a journalist and will come in and join our 4-year apprenticeship scheme, which they could start at 16. And it also means that, they can be fully qualified by the age of 20. They haven't had the cost of university, and they've managed to hit the ground running and coming in and be working on breaking news stories. They're all very digitally focused already, because they use all of the social media apps to communicate with their friends. So to have them out covering, live on Facebook, isn't a big deal.
And how would somebody, so if you're a school and you're not really sure what you want to do, but actually you do enjoy writing, you enjoy journalism, how would they get onto this scheme?
Well, the best thing they can do to get onto this scheme is to contact me on my email address, which is toby.granville@newsquest.co.uk. We want to encourage as many schools as possible to get on board. We've been very pleased with how it's going so far for the first year, and the aim is to have an apprentice in every one of our newsrooms through this scheme across the UK. And and some of our apprentices have gone on to be brilliant journalists already. The ones that we've had through the normal apprentice scheme that we've been running. But it's really, and it's a great way for us as well to get more diversity into the newsroom, which I'm really keen on building on.
And in terms of what bothers you, what troubles you story-wise, that you just think, do you know what? I just want to know more about that, or when it happens, it makes your blood boil?
Yeah, I mean, I generally get really worked up quite a bit about stories about the criminal justice system, open justice, the poor sentencing of criminals in the UK. When you look at the records of some of the worst criminals in this country, and their sentences are so lenient, absolutely, sickens me. I mean, and as an industry, we should be really doing more to campaign about the fact that women and children in our communities aren't safe to walk the streets. I mean, it's those sort of stories, the stories that we're going to be covering, in the true crime. I mean, the recent, sentencing of Wayne Cousins and now David Carrick, and this week another Met Police Chief Inspector, Richard Watkinson, facing charges for child abuse images. I mean, that's 3 senior Met police officers. It's just incredible. I mean, that's the sort of thing that makes my blood boil. And the fact is that that trust in the community, the communities that we're serving, we want the people who live in our communities to feel safe. And if they can't even feel safe from the police, who can they feel safe by? Well, those are the sorts of things that make my blood boil.
Absolutely. I mean, police officers, obviously, being a former police officer, you've got Cousins, you've got Carrick, and you've got Watkins. These are 3 big cases that have come to attention in the last 3-4 days. And I think one of the massive problems is that it then tars everybody with the same brush. I had a police officer that messaged me yesterday, and their plea was, please, can we get some messages? Can we let the public know we're not all like that? It is the minority. And one of the criticisms that they're applying currently is they don't feel supported by the senior officers. The senior officers come out and talk and say, look, this, we're shocked by this, it's appalling. But they don't go and tell them and say, do you know what? Rank and file officers up and down, not just in the Metropolitan Police, but up and down the country, are doing a brilliant job. And they are doing a brilliant job. It's the minority that affect it for everybody else. And of course, they're shocking. I mean, I think one of the things about society and life is that we know about cases because they're so shocking and because they don't happen every single day. If they happened every single day, there'd be a normality. We'd go, well, it happens every day, so what? No, we know about it. We talk about it because they are so horrific. I mean, the reality of having a chief inspector who at home has a closet which was full of child abuse material, stories, other related child material and clothing, serving and in a position of authority to that degree is truly shocking. And it does ask the question, and I think it's a question that we as a society have to address, but certainly the police has to address, is what type of people are now getting into the police service?
Yeah.
In my day, as a police officer, when you applied to become a police officer, you had the local sergeant come and visit you at home. You'd go through a real scrutiny in terms of recruitment. That is not happening. And I'll tell you why it's not happening. Because there are currently, or there were 30,000 police officers needed to be recruited. And in order to get that number up, they had to drop some of the requirements of recruitment because, of course, not everybody would fit that. They wouldn't be able to get 30,000. And that results in some of those people who should not be in the police force in the force.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, 100%. And I saw a report yesterday to say that they're going to be doing criminal record checks on all of the existing police force. Why wasn't that done when they started? I mean, it's absolutely shocking to think that these people who are meant to be protecting us are actually some of the worst criminals among them. And it's just absolutely stunning. It really needs, to be, completely redone from start to finish, the police force, because that's the only way there's going to be any trust. There needs to be some serious fundamental changes.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for example, how can Carrick between 2020 and 2021 be investigated 9 times for allegations of a rape and still be in a job? He was investigated in 2021 for an allegation of rape, but he was put on light duties. What? Suspend the man, and whilst that suspension goes on, investigate. And when the allegation was dropped, he was allowed to return back to duties. But some of the most sensitive duties, he held a gun. He was responsible for the policing of the Prime Minister. How is that possible? How is it possible that a person who's been suspended, how is it possible that a person who's been investigated for rape is carrying a gun and is on duty? I mean, I find that absolutely incredible, don't you?
I do. I mean, it's jaw-dropping stuff. It really is. And the fact that Wayne Couzens' nickname was the rapist, and David Carrick's nickname was the bastard, and it's kind of like, well, if that was their nickname, surely that should have been some red flags right away, this is the thing about it, is that all of these things could have been stopped, before they happened. The worst possible crimes could have been stopped if the police had done their job properly with these guys that have now, been one of the worst criminals in the country and in our history for the type of crimes that they've now been responsible for.
And it's quite incredible that an individual can be arrested for an allegation, yet the police not check out their job.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just absolutely smacks of a complete, cover up and keep it all hushed up. Any policeman that's got any criminal record or criminal tendency should simply not be in the job. It's as simple as that.
Do you know, I find that very interesting because that's my view. My view is if you have a criminal record, with the exception of perhaps something as a very young person that you did, which was a minor, criminal damage or something, which you can explain, it was a moment of time and it was a long time ago. But anybody who has any substantial offences, I am astonished that they are allowed to be a police officer. And I'm sorry, if I held a position of politician, I would simply say, if you have a conviction of dishonesty, theft, sexual offence, you cannot be a police officer. I don't see how you can uphold the law when you've broken the law.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
So, Toby, what's in the round the corner? So, obviously, we've got this great new podcast that we're doing now, and we've got some really exciting guests that are coming on. We've got some characters who I know personally. I went through my address book with Jody, and the two of us looked at our address book, and it's amazing as you go through some of the characters I've met over the years. And so, I'm going to try and get some of them to come on and engaging them in a way that is probably slightly different to what they would normally talk about, in a fun, interesting way, but also delve to the bottom of some of the issues. So we're going to get David Swindle in. David Swindle was the officer that led the Tobin investigation from Scotland, and he's a great character. I know him very, very well, and he's got some fascinating stories. Peter Fording runs Specialist Group International. They are a company that goes out and works for police, primarily diving. So they go and sadly recover bodies from water and also evidence. So they'll search perhaps an area looking for a gun or a safe or an item that's been used in crime. But he also does digs. And I use that in a term where he would be called into an area perhaps where a body could have been buried or evidence could have been buried, and he and his team will look for that. And they'll use great techniques. There's something that's called a magnetometer, which shows the disturbance in the ground. They'll use ground penetrating radar, again, which uses radar waves in and out of the ground to show where there's an anomaly, where perhaps a body could be buried. And as well as that, I'm going to get involved a couple of politicians that I know, get them past and present involved. They're always great to talk to because they've always got an opinion. That's one of the great things about politicians. And I get people who are happy to challenge me as well. I'm quite happy to be put onto the spot in terms of what I've done and ask some of those questions. So I think as those weeks go on, we're going to get some really interesting characters. And then the other thing we're going to do is every week we're going to get somebody from Newsquest to come on and celebrate journalism from a local level, but also crucially cover some of those stories which mean a lot to local communities.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Actually, I think there's going to be some fantastic guests on here. It's another pioneering podcast that we've never actually done before, anything like this. And I think I'm absolutely love the whole kind of true crime podcast. I mean, there's been some great ones that have been done across in the US and in Australia. I mean, you look at what I'm really hoping for is that we start getting more and more of our local journalists involved in those. The ones that really make a big difference. Like something like Serial, which was the first true crime podcast I listened to. It really hooked me in.
Teacher's Pet from Australia.
The Teacher's Pet, which resulted in the teacher's trial. Hedley Thomas of the Australian newspaper doing an amazing job. He's just exposed a government-run DNA clinic that's been running DNA samples incorrectly, which is going to result in thousands of retests and retrials. So, that's the kind of thing, the thing that actually makes a big difference, the kind of investigative journalism that really matters. And if we can get, our trained journalists at Newsquest, they've been trained by the NCTJ, which is, the gold standard for the industry for journalism training. We're going to be, helping them get skilled up as well with, investigative skills. And I think, coupled with all of that, I think that we're going to be doing some game-changing, award-winning journalism. And we've got some great talented journalists at Newsquest. My view is that our journalists are the best in the industry. They're all very enthusiastic. They love doing all of this stuff that's kind of new and innovative. And I can't wait for us to get started.
No, there's exciting times ahead, isn't there? And I think, new year, new challenges, new podcast series. And I think the podcast series is going to be quite fascinating because people love talking. And one of the things people often say to me is, well, when you go and talk to people, and of course I talk to people all the time, whether they've done something wrong or whether they're helping me. One of the things that people often say to me is, well, how do you get them to talk? Well, the reality is that most people like talking. If you sat most people down and once you've done the introduction and they feel fairly comfortable talking to you, they'll talk, they'll open up. And therefore, it's very rare that I go to someone's house for whatever reason, whether they've done something bad or not, that I can't get them to talk. And I think those are skills from a local journalism level that we need to keep encouraging. We need to get people out and about. One of the things that I am very critical about is journalism can't be done behind a desk. You need to get out, you need to go and see people, you need to talk to people. That's journalism.
Yeah, it is. And that's absolutely key. I mean, we've kept all of our newsrooms, in across the country, and so a lot of our journalists are actually working in a newsroom, and they can be sent out there to speak to the relevant people. You can't. There's no better journalism than actually being out on the street and actually talking to people. It can't be done through text and social media. You don't build up a rapport. You don't build up trust. People are going to open up to you by, if we see with our court reporters, they go to the court, but getting what happened in the court is just one part of the story. The rest of the story is about the people and getting the people to talk to you and humanizing it so people can relate to that story. And so you can't do journalism behind a desk. You've got to be out there face to face, talking to people and getting their stories.
Absolutely. And one of the things about this podcast, it's going to be live. So as we get known and people join us over their lunch break, we want you to send us questions, ask us questions, and engage with us properly. And we've got Patsy who sent us a message, and she basically said we need more independent journalists, those that can reach the public, and many of the public have lost trust in some of the regular news outlets like the BBC and Sky. I think that's a pretty fair analogy. I don't think that's a criticism necessarily of the BBC and Sky individual reporters. I think it's because generally national news is being trusted less than regional news.
Yeah, and I think I don't know about Sky. I actually think that Sky News is a great broadcasters, and in fact, Mark Austin, who's one of the journalists.
I know Mark well. He's a great guy.
He started his career on the Bournemouth Echo.
Really?
So
get Mark on board then. So
great. Yeah,
Mark came from Bournemouth. Brilliant.
Yeah, and so I think that people like Kay Burley. I mean, they all started in local news, papers, and that's why I always tell journalists, and I think the Sky is a very good operation. The BBC, has obviously lost a lot of trust, through a number of situations. The Jimmy Savile situation, Cliff Richard, and more recently, obviously, with the Princess Diana. Falsifying the facts that came out about that.
The whole Martin Bashir situation.
Yeah, exactly, Martin Bashir. So I think that and you only have to go on social media and look at the comments underneath about the BBC to see that people have lost trust in the BBC. They've and so that's why more and more people, I think, are turning to our local news, because they know that they can trust us, and rightly so, because that's what we work to do every single day.
Brilliant. Patsy, I should put my glasses on properly, or should clean them anyway. So Patsy said STV, not Sky.
All right.
STV. Yeah, I mean, I've done a little bit of work up in Scotland in terms of filming up there. I don't know STV that well, but I think the problem with all of the national outlets is that from a trust level, they've all had certain things that have gone wrong for them, and some of that is about an eagerness to be the first. I mean, I think one of the things that that I often say to people when I'm talking to journalists is just be really careful. You might want to be the first, but if you get it wrong, you will be remembered. Just take a little bit of time and get it right and get that information out there. And I think I saw it after Savile. There was this real desire from outlets to be the first to break the next story. And we saw it with BBC Newsnight when they went after McAlpine. I remember in the afternoon of head of broadcast, I remember the reporter talking to me and said, "Look, Mark, we've got this story, we're going to go with it." And I said, "Are you sure it's right?" I said, there's just some stuff doesn't seem to add up and doesn't connect with what I've been dealing with, but it just doesn't seem to connect. "Oh, yeah, no, we're sure, we're certain." Anyway, of course it broadcast, and then it transpires that they completely got the wrong person. And that's about journalism being, knowing their trade, but also being in a position where they've done the groundwork. And I think it's very easy to cut corners in journalism. And of course, when you get it wrong, you can get it massively wrong. I mean, I know when head of broadcast of Savile, I remember talking to Leslie, my producer, and I said to her, "Look, if this doesn't hit big and if this doesn't go and the public don't come on our side, we will probably never work in journalism again. We'll certainly be never making, high profile television programs. And thankfully, the public did come on board. It stayed on the front pages for 41 consecutive days, and it was a huge story. But it could have all gone wrong. And I think, the highs in journalism are massive. I mean, Toby, you know that as a journalist, when you get a story and you put it out there, the highs are massive, but the lows are very low as well.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that. I mean, when I started out, there was the worst thing was getting hold of the story and then knowing that because we didn't have the internet, having to sit on it for a week, up to a week sometimes.
Yeah.
Before you're publishing it, and every day you're hoping that your competitor or the BBC or someone else hasn't got the story. And now that the problem is there is this huge rush because news is instant, and if you do get it wrong, as you say, you're stuffed, and we did used to be, it was all about being first, and best, but now it's very much, we've got to be, we want to be first, but we need to be best. And sometimes, as you say, the first people to break the story could have upset the people involved in the story. And then that's our opportunity really to go in and smooth things over and then try and get, it done in a more professional way. And I think, that is the issue now, as you say, is about getting it right. And particularly the journalism that we're going to be doing at Newsquest, we can't afford to get that wrong, but we can take our time and make sure that we've got it right.
Well, Toby, brilliant having you on board. I'm really excited by our new venture. It's going to be brilliant. I think we've got the great opportunity. We've got a great platform, and some of the characters we're going to get on board to come and talk and be with me, I think is going to be fascinating. So listen, if you're watching this or you're catching it up a little bit later, please do join us twice weekly. So predominantly on Wednesdays and Thursdays. So twice weekly, we'll give some promotion ahead of who's coming on, and interact with us. Send us messages, ask us some questions, or send us some questions in advance that you'd like us to put to people. Maybe even suggest people that you'd like to go on board. Not everyone's going to come on board. One of the things that will often happen is that some people don't like to be questioned by me. I remember doing an article or a report for the ITN News, the 6 o'clock news, and it was about Facebook. And I had very good relationships with Facebook at the time. And I phoned Facebook press office up and I said, listen, we've got this story we're going to run. It's on the national news. It's quite big. Would someone give us an interview? And the press officer, who I knew very well, said to me, Mark, there's no way I'm putting somebody up to be interviewed by you. And I went, well, hang on a minute. I'm just going to ask them the straight questions, but I think it's you have a duty to as an organization. They said, well, we're not going to do that. But I hope, those people who are robust enough, have made whatever decisions they've had in the right way, will come on board and we can have a proper chat. But so do please join us twice weekly. Let your friends know, let your family know, record it, perhaps watch it a bit later. But please join us. It's a really exciting new venture. Toby, it's been brilliant having you on board. What's the rest of the day look like?
Well, actually, I'm going into Bournemouth University to do a news day with the students, which I'm really looking forward to. Hoping to see them some talent. We've managed to hire a few from there before the last couple of years, and it's really great to sort of see the students and see how they're developing their journalism skills. And
how do you relax, Toby?
How do I relax? I go for a run normally. There's
there we are.
Or I.
Is that you relaxing in your hot tub in your palatial garden?
Yeah, but I do try. Yeah, I spend a lot of time with my daughters. One of my daughters both play sport, and so I'm going off to see her play football in a couple of matches over the weekend, which I'm looking forward to as well. So yeah, I generally try and unwind through some kind of working out or trying to be, lift a pathetic amount of weights in the gym.
And mental health, just before we finish, and mental health is a big issue. Of course, we now talk about it. I've suffered my own mental health, but it is really important. And it's something that certainly NewsQuest, put a lot of attention to.
Yeah, we do. We do have, a mental health advisor, and what have you now, who works for our company. I mean, we do, particularly, I think, with people working, at home in isolation. That's why, we were so keen to have newsrooms, because I think that, and keep them open. Some publishers closed them up, once COVID was over, but we were really keen to keep them open because it's so important, not just for the skills that journalists pick up from one another by sitting there in a newsroom, but for their mental health as well, having other people to talk to. These jobs, journalism, can be a very, solitary job, and obviously, sometimes they do want to take time out to write up their stories or do their training, and that's fine. But, it is really important, and we do encourage, all of our staff to make sure that they do spend time, going out and having a break and getting away from the screen and not having, constant calls, because it can affect, your mental health. And I think that there's plenty of other times, the ways to do things. That was a very old picture. I was in a lot better shape then than I am now, I can tell you.
Brilliant, Toby. Listen, fantastic. Thank you for joining me, the first of our podcast series. So twice a week, join me talking True Crime Newsquest, where I will be speaking to characters, individuals, celebrities, and people who have been affected by crime. You'll hear their story direct and live when I talk to them about their situation. So join me, ask me questions, join us through the comments chat, and you will learn things. But not only that, because remember, every day is a school day, but also you'll enjoy it because it is fun. I'll make sure it is fun, but also educational. So twice a week, join me talking true crime, where I will be interviewing individuals who bring a fascinating story. Until next week, thank you.